I know you mentioned not having a lot of energy,
Yeah.
and something I recently, I guess I knew about,
Yeah.
but I don't think many people know
Mm-hmm.
that there's an actual term for it, which is the low
Yep.
energy availability,
Yes,
or also
correct.
known as LEA.
Yep.
Um, do you think that's something that I guess, one, what is it exactly?
Sure.
I know you referenced it a little bit,
Absolutely. Yeah.
and do you think that's something that is commonly overlooked
Mm-hmm.
when it
Mm-hmm.
comes to all aspects of I guess someone's goal, whether that's the
Yeah.
recovery, whether they're feeling fatigue and all
Yeah.
of these different things.
Yep. Yep. Absolutely. So you've hit on a very hot topic. So low energy availability, and there's actually another syndrome, if you will, that is associated with it, which is called relative energy deficiency in sport,
Mm,
or another acronym, REDS.
mm,
Okay. So, and it is based on the principle of low energy availability. So, what is that? Simple math equation. You are basically expending more energy than you are taking in,
mm,
right? So if you think about it, when I do a PowerPoint presentation, I have a slide that's set up like a math equation, right? So you're burning more than you're taking in. That's going to leave you with a negative, right? Or
mm,
let's say your training all of a sudden ramps up and your food stays the same.
mm,
Also, you can end up low, right? Or your training stays the same and you decrease your calories. So, all of those things can lead to this low energy availability state.
mm.
So, now what does that mean? What that means is, here's my next slide. If I click through my PowerPoint, right? I next would put up a slide that is that low power mode. Have you ever seen that pop up on your iPhone?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You don't get
So
too excited when you see that,
yeah,
right? Yeah.
it's like your body's battery power, I guess. Yeah.
Exactly. So your body, if you get that low power mode and you're like, "Ooh, shoot, I have no battery left. This phone needs to last for a while. Let's go to low power mode. Let's do that." So what that does is it sort of it kind of dims the light. It suppresses a lot of the systems in the body.
Mm,
So what we start to see then is not always right away, and that can be the tricky part, right? But we start to see, or I'll name several things you can see, right? You might not see all of these things happen, but a lot of times we get a slowed metabolism. So fun fact, we can actually see people gain weight when they're in an
mm.
energy deficit.
Oh,
So
wow.
if you think of someone that may be trying to cut their calories and diet and they're training a lot and they're gaining weight, if you think about it, if your metabolism's slowing to protect the body, because your body senses energy deficit. It senses that kind of that fight or flight
Mm-hmm.
syndrome, right? Like, oh, my body doesn't have enough energy, so I got to conserve what I'm getting.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So sometimes not always, some people lose weight, okay? But
Mm-hmm.
it can go either way.
Yeah.
So that's something often where it is actually overlooked.
Mm,
Sometimes I've had athletes referred in, and a lot of times in an aesthetic sport, whether it's dance or gymnastics or figure skating, an athlete or even a coach, or weight management for this athlete. And a lot of times, honestly, I'm not going to say 9 out of 10, but it's not far off from that. It's not that the athlete's coming in and they're just eating way too much food. It's a lot of times that there's actually been a chronic underfueling, which has led to a metabolic suppression,
mm.
which has now led to the body storing more energy as fat to
Wow.
protect it. So the cure for that is actually increasing the calories and increasing the metabolic rate. So that's one thing you can see. For female athletes, and actually male athletes too, but you can get a suppression of hormone levels. So for males, you can get low testosterone in more severe restricted circumstances. And for females, we see menstrual cycle abnormalities. So that is, I mean, for females, it's a bit of like a clearer picture. Basically, again, if the body is conserving energy, the body doesn't have enough energy to have a cycle. Your hormone levels suppress, your estrogen level suppresses, and the body stops menstruating. So that's a big one. And that is a huge one that we see in our female athletes, or a delayed onset of a menstrual period. A female athlete is about usually 15 and a half is kind of a cutoff point. If an athlete has not started menstruating by that point, we tend to see a negative effect on bone, so low bone density.
Mm-hmm.
So the suppressed hormones. So if a male is suppressed in testosterone, same effect. It can decrease bone mass.
Mm.
So sometimes you might see, along with an athlete not getting a menstrual period or having low testosterone, bone stress injuries or stress fractures, because the bones are not, you don't have the hormone levels to help build bone density.
Right.
And another fun fact off of that, I could talk about, this is a soapbox for me, as you can tell. It's a big, important one. So what happens is females only build bone density. So thickness and strength of the bones, building that only happens until about age 20 in a female.
And it stops after that point?
So,
Interesting.
correct. So think about that.
Does it stop at some point for males?
It does. So males, it's a bit later in the 20s. It's don't quote me on this, but it is, I believe it's around like 26 or but it's later. So males do get more time. But females, so if you have an athlete that is under fueling, not getting her menstrual cycle in her teenage years, see where I'm going with this? Our clock is ticking. So if I get someone that comes to me at age 25 with low bone density, we do over in our program at Boston Children's, we'll do bone density scans and or DEXA scans, as they're more commonly known, to look at an athlete's bone density. And if someone is very low outside of their year building range, now we're looking into more of like medications, right? You can focus on more calcium and vitamin D in the diet to help maintain what someone has, but you can't build more. So that's why we hit it really hard when we're talking about energy availability and having enough food in the body. Bone health is a big, big, big one. So, and sometimes you might notice an athlete is getting a stress fracture and maybe you have to dig a little deeper, right? And or physician or whoever that individual is, and you might find out that, oh yeah, this person, she's never had her period before. And so we do a lot of education around that because sometimes it's a taboo topic. People don't want to talk about it.
Right.
And, one thing, I can't talk about this without mentioning this, putting a female on a birth control pill to get a period is actually not getting a true period. You're not solving the underlying issue. So that's something I always like to put out there. And that's
because I was reading
Yes.
that was kind of like a tip or a cure for them to kind of achieve to get that period.
And
but
it
it's
is not. It is absolutely not. So it doesn't help with bone building. There is a complex scientific, it has to do with the IGF-1, which is a growth hormone, but you do not build bone density by being on a pill.
Yeah.
So you have to treat the underlying cause,
I see.
which is nutrition typically.
Yeah, I know. I remember reading a post somewhere or an article or something like that about an NCAA athlete who it was a male athlete who didn't figure out how important nutrition was. And he had misinformation and doing things like not eating enough calories and things like that, and at times intentionally, because he thought that was the route to go. And it wasn't until his college years that he started to really understand, like, oh wait, I've been under eating.
Exactly.
And so I guess what are your thoughts on what is the best way to help younger athletes get more of this information so that they can avoid these possible deficiencies as they get older?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think education is key, right? I think I do a lot of outreach, right? We're having this conversation here.
Right.
And again, like it's, I don't mean to overfocus on females. This is males too, right? I think a lot of males, I hear it all the time. And, sometimes they're noticing it also, like not being able to build muscle or find, strength gains for females or males. I should mention those two as other potential side effects of an energy deficit. You're doing all this training
and you're not really seeing
it. And a lot of times people think, oh, well, I gotta clean up these calories more or pull back more, right? But right, that's misinformation, right? So I do think that the more, registered dietitians, especially those that really specialize in sport. So another credential for you, CSSD is a certified specialist in sports dietetics.
I see. Okay.
So
and that's I would assume that would be do they go through a similar schooling?
So you need to be an RD.
Right.
And then you need to be an RD for at least, it's a minimum of 2 years, but you need to do, let me remember this. I think it's 1,500 hours of sport-specific counseling to then sit for that exam.
CSSD.
CSSD.
CSSD comes after being
an RD.
Gotcha.
RD is like, that's the building the base of the building, if you will. But yeah, I think, you know what we're seeing, I'm in some organizations for sport dietitians. A big one is, I have all these acronyms. We have so many acronyms, but it's the Collegiate and Professional Sport Dietitian Association. So most sport dietitians in the country are members of that. And a lot of all the US Olympic dietitians are part of it, all the collegiate dietitians. So those individuals, you know, we go to conferences every year and we, you know, spread information, good information, among the organization about these topics. So sports dietitians are going out and doing a lot of education, right? If you're on the collegiate level, but also on high school level. Collegiate levels, a lot of schools, not all, unfortunately, not all have the budget for it, have a dedicated sports dietitian on staff. I know several on-campus sports dietitians, even in the local area, that do. I was speaking to a colleague of mine, Emily from my private practice, who was a sports dietitian. She's the dietitian at Brown, and she's like, I gave 12 lectures, and, you know, so she's talking to all the teams and she's talking about this. Wow, so this topic, it's being spoken about. When dietitians are educating, doing team talks, they're not just talking about proteins, carbs, fats, and hydration. They are, but you can't talk about those things without talking about getting enough, right? We always say that's the bottom of the pyramid. If you're thinking of the pyramid of like fueling, right? Getting enough food, periodization, timing, supplements, those all come higher up the pyramid. If you're not getting enough,
then everything else almost doesn't matter in a way.
Exactly. You can't build a house on a weak foundation, right? So I think that education is key. I think reaching out, again, registered dietitians, sports dietitians. There's other also professionals, like athletic trainers can be amazing resources too. Coaches, right? I think coaches, athletic trainers, physical therapists, physicians, educating themselves too on this topic. Here, I'm going to give another plug. Our group has our group out of Children's has a female athlete conference every other year. We just had over 1,500 attendees virtually and in person. Yeah,
wow.
Right, hair flip. This past year, but it's a platform for education, and this is one of the big topics that's talked about there. And how do you educate your athletes on this, right? How do you recognize signs and symptoms? I mean, we even have parents attend that conference.
That's awesome.
The parents of athletes, right, to learn, what do I look for? How do I help my child like fuel? What do I give them before practice? What do I get? You know, some parents are like, I wasn't an athlete, or I was an athlete, but
and we have where we have and you know, I wasn't as involved as kids are today in their activities and athletics.
That's a great point.
You know, because they're doing many different activities, and they're very busy.
They are
so
very
busy. It's definitely they're so busy.
Busier. I mean, honestly, like same way. Like I've been an athlete my whole life, and I played club soccer. I played but I look at what the schedules are now.
Yeah,
and it's like it's a lot. The pressure is a lot more too. I feel like the pressure on these kids, the time, like it's a lot, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, parents, coaches, it takes a village, right?
Absolutely.
So we need, you know, a lot of eyes, a lot of education to help really support our athletes.
Right.
So, yeah. Talk to you about the athletes' plates. Those are a good resource. It's like it's a visual representation of like what the plate should look like during different intensities of training.
Okay.
It's from the US Olympic sports dietitians.
Okay.
So a resource that I would recommend for those listening that might wonder where do I start, right? Certainly you can meet with a registered dietitian, but there are certainly some things you can start to think about, you know, doing at home or putting into place. So one of my favorite tools, I think anyone that's ever seen me has had me show them this. It's called the athlete's plate, or the athlete's plates, and it is a 3-plate model. It's based on the My Plate. Are you familiar with My Plate? Yeah. So that's sort of the new food guide. Well, not so new anymore, right? Or maybe I'm old, but we had the food guide pyramid back. I'm 41, so it's been a minute, but we learned the food guide pyramid. So, but basically the My Plate shows like half fruits and vegetables, a quarter protein, a quarter starch. But the athlete's plates, the 3 plates show you, well, how should I portion my plate when I'm doing really like low activity? Or maybe I'm injured, maybe I'm not doing a lot. What about if I'm doing moderate activity, which is maybe an hour or two a day? Or what if I'm doing really intense activity, which is over, you know, an hour and a half, over 2 hours, or for a lot of like my growing athletes. So what those plates show you is basically it's a shifting of the portions. And spoiler alert, if you are to Google them, you will see that the starch or the carbohydrate component of the plate increases with the amount of volume and activity. And guess what? It never comes off the plate. So even if someone's injured, even if someone is very low on activity, we're not like, oh, no carbs, you're not working out.
Right.
The needs might decrease.
Because even if they're seeing, like, say if there's a physical goal that they have,
Totally.
they might be seeing like a physical change.
Yep.
It could honestly be pretty detrimental long term.
Yes.
For them if they completely take off something that, as
Exactly.
you're mentioning, is like their primary source of energy.
Absolutely. Exactly. So, and like I mentioned when we first started speaking, that yes, proportions of nutrients might shift and change throughout the year if you're injured, but you really want to be careful about cutting things out. Or I'm actually doing research in this, is looking at how athletes are doing, you know, how they're thinking about their food, how they're thinking about their nutrition, and even their like identity as an athlete if they're injured. So that's, I'll come back and talk another time about that.
Well, but you start to tap in on their relationship with food.
Correct. Which is something I talk to my athletes about, right?